now we're recording, guys. That's marvelous. Okay, so if anyone who's joining the recording, I was just telling all our lovely participants in the room that we are doing finding funding and grant writing. We're going to be 2 hours together, and I'm going to be stopping or pausing the recordings when we do exercises so that everybody in the room can be really honest and kind of discuss their services. And if you're watching it, you don't have to watch that, but you can just look at the content. Okay, so the learning objectives, we're going to have some tips and good practice, and that's going to come from our slides, but also from people in the room. And we have some people with good experience in the room, as well as some who are just learning. We're going to be looking at proposals for like funding. Where do we find them? Proposals, how do we write them? Engaging corporate partners. So how do we get supermarkets and insurance companies to fund some of our projects? Tenders, how to write them. So that's when someone has a contract that we want to fulfill. And then government funding, the holy grail, we would all love that, is year-on-year funding for staff, how to strategize to get that. Great. Now let's get into the material at hand, which is finding and accessing and assessing grants. Okay, the first place you need to go to find them all, the best place is the wheel. So the wheel have a thing called Funding Point. It comes out every month, but you can log on to it at any time. And it has a database of over 800 grant schemes in the country. Costs $125 if you're a member of the wheel, and that would be for non-profits or charities or social enterprises. If you fit in any of those categories, the wheel is the national representative body. And for $200, if you're not a member, you can sign up to this bulletin, Funding Point service. So everything's in there. So it's extremely useful, because often if you find out about these grants from other sources, it's, you know, you're quite late down the train. Already there's been weeks gone by, and sometimes you only have 6 weeks to pull it together. If it's complex, or you need a partner, or there's lots of budget stuff, you may need all those 6 weeks. So by signing up to that, you're going to get it quickly. Okay, Active Link also have a newsletter that you can sign up to. It's free, and that would include funding and fundraisers. And usually the wheel will cover that, but if you're not paying that money, or you just want to see what's coming up, Active Link is also a very good source. It's worth signing up to your local public participation. What do you want? Because they will have a newsletter, and that will often have small local grants that may have been missed out by these other national services. So that can be a really great place to get your information. So guys, these are all places where they group together everything. I'll show you one more that's European in a little while, but these are like kind of your beginning bit. Now I'm going to show you a whole lot of very particular ones. And after I've showed you all these grants, so I'm going to talk through them a little bit, but there's pages and pages and pages here that I'm about to give you. It's more for a reference for you for later. So when you're like, where are some grants? You can go back to these slides and have a little look. But as we go through, can I ask you to think about what's worked for you? Because you might have information on them. You might have gone through one and be able to share about that with other people. They're not everything, because as we said, there's 800 in the wheel database. I'm only showing you about 25, okay? 25 common ones that people will often use. So if you've got an experience, we might, you might have something useful to share with other people in the group. So any insider tips. Any funds that you think locally are really, really useful, or you've heard a little bit about each other's projects, so anything that might be useful to someone else, let's share it in the room. And then any questions that you might have, if I can, I'll answer them. Of course, someone else may be able to as well. So let's get in and have a look what we've got. Okay, so here we are. We have, and you'll see there, I've said a little bit about them, and then we've given you the link so you can go and see when their grants come up. So NTR Foundation is looking at environmental projects. So obviously for Brian, that might be very useful. Go have a look at that. Rethink Fund. These guys have a lot of funds coming out, usually about 4 to 6 a year. They'll fund equality, environment, education, social enterprise. So they do ones, and like, so some of you maybe that may applicable be to quite a few. They give you money, and they also give you a consultant. So I'm one of their consultants. So I often get hired by them to work with an organization. So you get money, but often you get a strategist who's going to work with you to kind of answer some of your questions. They might be in relation to governance, to business, often they're quite interested in two things, Rethink. They like people to have an outcome framework so that they're getting data to say, are we making a difference? They really want you to have one of those in place. And that is one of the key engines of grants, of grant writing. So you have a good outcome framework. You have good data to say, we make a difference. Every other grant that you apply for is going to be a whole lot easier. So they like to make sure that you've got that in place, and they like to make sure that you've got a strategy and business plan. So all the core fundamentals that say, how are we going to make a difference? How are we going to be sustainable? And how does our model work? So they're really worth looking into, these guys here. Some of the programs are entry level. So say around social enterprise, they'll be quite open to people who are at the very beginning of the journey. Whereas other funds might want to see you a bit further along, but these guys have some supports for that. Social Entrepreneurs Ireland does a similar thing. Okay, so they're quite similar to Rethink in that, and they will have pathways that go from you've just got an idea, but you have no idea how you're going to bring it to fruition, to social enterprises that have been existing and operating a number of years and they want to grow. So that might be the community centre that wants to do a new program. It might be Creative Spark that wants to move into, a different area of enterprise supports or development. So both Rethink and Social Entrepreneurs Ireland, if you're in the social enterprise category, these are some of the best for you. Okay, Heritage Council. So this is, heritage can often be extended to include biodiversity. So if you're in the environmental space, you may not necessarily think of these guys, but it's worth having a look, because heritage includes, often it's considered to include our spoken word, our culture, our built heritage, but also the biodiversity. So if you're in some of those areas like culture or biodiversity, you may not necessarily think to go to these guys, but it could be worth looking at them. Okay, and then energy projects, you can go to these guys here, and they have some grants. Very useful if you've got a building as well. You want to see what grants they have available to you. Okay, so if you have notes and you want to, actually, I might pause on each slide just in case, right? That might be the better way rather than doing it right at the end. Does anybody have anything to say, any experience of any of these that they think would be useful for the rest of the group to hear? Nope. Okay, we'll roll on to the next one. Okay, so the National Lottery. So these guys give quite a lot. It's quite localized. It helps if you have a connection to the HSC. So the HSC can, in some cases, advise them or kind of say, these are projects that we work quite well with. So it can be very useful to look at who has won that fund previously. And I would give them a call. I would give them a call and say, how did you find that? Now, they may not want to share if they're going for it again. They might be a bit closed book and say, well, actually, we don't want another competitor for that fund. But it can be quite useful for certain funds. And actually, for Rethink Ireland and Social Entrepreneurs, you're not going to win it twice in a row. You get it 1 year. You're not going to get it the next 2 or 3 years. You might be able to get it 4 or 5 years down the track. So it can be quite useful to find out who was from the year before and ring them and say, what shall I do? That would be really good advice if you're going for a bigger fund. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Was someone going to come in there? Okay, Pobble. So Pobble will run a number of funds for different parts of the sector.
It is, isn't it?
Someone's talking there. Would you mind turning your mic off? Someone with a bit of background noise. Okay, so Pobble will have grants, many grants, and they will be very cautious about taking phone calls. So because they're working, they manage, I don't know how many hundred, 300, but it's probably up to 600 million worth of funds for the government. So they'll be very, very procedural because they have to be. And it's best to really read their details, often with a new fund that's launched. So they won't work outside that a lot, but they'll run the fund very, very efficiently. And they will often do an information session at the beginning of a new fund. One of their funds is called the SSNO. And so if people are looking for core staff, they often think, oh, SSNO. And that comes out every 3 years. You can get it for core funding. So a lot of funds are project funding, and they won't give you ongoing core funding. SSNO does do that. It happens every 3 years, and they give you core funding for 3 years. So that's the kind of thing that would employ a manager or an admin officer, these kind of stuff. Very hard to find funds that will fund that. SSNO, however, largely funds the same, I think there's 100 organizations or something like that that get it, and they're largely the same each year. So it's very hard to get one of those off and to get you on. So I'm not saying don't go for it. I'm just saying don't set your hearts on it or your sights on it. It's a probably the most competitive fund out there. And sometimes people will say, oh, go and get money here. That's not true, though. You can't just go and get money there. It's exceedingly competitive, very, very hard to get. You can get a list. The good thing with all Pobbles funds is that you can get a list of who is getting everything. And so you can sometimes seek advice. Okay, the Ireland Fund. So here is a global philanthropic network. With these guys, they like to establish a relationship with you. So they like you to get a small, tiny fund, and they like to see you do well at that and report well, make a difference, really, really give them something to show and understand how you use their funding. And then you can move into bigger funds. They have a lot of grantees from America, and the way they spend their funding will, just like Community Foundation below them, largely depend on the interests of their donors. So they're a donor-driven fund. And so they might have some that are open. So they might have, say, an environmental fund where people apply, and that will feel more like Pobble or Rethink. But for the bigger grants, they can match you up with a donor who they think will like you. So in those kind of funds, Community Foundation and Ireland Fund, it's really good to work at getting some small funds and establishing a relationship with the actual organization if you can. They're often looking for something quite unique and particular, or it could be that a donor came from your area and they want to donate to an issue in your area. And if that's the case, of course, you could be really lucky. So that's a lot of relationship building. ESB's Energy for Generations. So this is a nice fund to get. It works around suicide prevention, homelessness, and so on, mental health. It comes around again and again. So if you're in those areas, this is quite a nice one, and it's not too arduous in terms of doing a funding application. Looking at that list there, does anyone want to make any comment or talk about learning that they've had in applying to any of these donors? Okay, guys. So next one. Okay, Tesco. So you'll know this because you would have seen it in the stores, wouldn't you, where you put your coins in. So that's one that you can do. And of course, in terms of fundraising, you can also ask to do the bag packing for them if you're doing a local fundraiser and you have local people. They can be, they can be all right, or they can be really good. I know on some busy days in the supermarket, if you've got a good crew there, people can make thousands and thousands, so they can be quite rewarding. There's often a waiting list for those. So again, building a relationship with your local Tesco is the way to do that there. Often these, the local kind of businesses like that, they do want a relationship, and it does help if someone's going to put you forward and say, hey, we really like this charity. So thinking about, and we'll talk about that when we get to corporates, how do you establish those relationships? Okay, the Coca-Cola Thank You Fund. Some banks and funds will operate where they're really clever about getting their name out there, and they might do a community voting type thing. So unless you have a really broad network of people who are going to engage, and so with Coca-Cola, you have to text your support. It's like a community vote type thing. So some organizations that have large memberships that are really well known, they might be particularly, these kind of funds might be particularly useful to them. If you're working with a small number of people, let's say you're an organization working intensely with a small number of disabled service users and their families, might not be the fund for you, because a community organization that has like 1,000 members, or Faroiga, or a youth group, imagine Faroiga, you wouldn't want to go up against them in a voting round, would you? Because they're going to be able to get all of their members involved and get them all voting, because they've got a huge network. So just be thoughtful about that kind of thing. Who's your competition? Can you beat them? Because of course, engaging in this stuff takes our time that we could be spending on other things. So you want to spend it well. Super Value, they're doing tiny towns, but you'll notice that a lot of the big corporates will choose a charity for the year. So I think who's out there at the moment? Women's football, one of the supermarkets has those. So we'll talk about that a little bit in corporates, how you get yourself onto that kind of thinking. Often those suit nationals. Okay, Google Ad Grants Program. This is where you can get up to 10 grand worth of free advertising. So this can be really, really useful. It doesn't work with social enterprises though, where there is a commercial offering. So we have, for example, one of our businesses that we have under our umbrella is a social enterprise that employs people out of prison or out of direct provision or out of rehabilitation, and it offers them workplace training. And so we make products and we sell products, but we can't use this because although we're a social enterprise and we're a charity as well, so we're a charity, a social enterprise, but we can't get these grants because we sell something. And you couldn't get it if you had a charity shop. But if you say, offer free classes or youth classes, or if you offer some kind of educational program for free for the community, this might be a good way of getting the word out there. And then we've got iVol. If you're not using volunteers, this can be good. It can also be a good way to kind of start engaging with local businesses. If your long-term strategy is for business sponsorship, having volunteers on board can be a good way to start building those relationships. Does anyone want to talk about any of those, any experience of any of those kinds of grants that are available?
We actually received the Coca-Cola Thank You award this year. And yeah, we would like to get it, but there was kind of two strands. There is the voting, but we weren't in the voting one. It was we needed to do a pitch.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so that's how we got it this time. So whether they've changed it slightly, I don't know, but
they may have changed it slightly, which is great to hear. Yeah. And can I ask how much you got from them?
Well, I applied for 2,900-ish to run we have a community employment program to deliver a community employment program to young people aged 21 to 25 who are hard to reach. And I did the pitch, and they liked the pitch that much that they gave me money to run 2 of them. So they gave me over 5,000 or 5,000 odd.
Well done. When we look at your USP and making your pitch, we're going to call on you.
Yeah, but you know what? Where it was brilliant to get that money, the advertising and the promotion that came out of it. Just recently, we had them down for a day where they brought their brand ambassadors down. So the amount of publicity we got out of it nearly overlooks the funding, if you know what I mean. It was invaluable. It was invaluable.
Brilliant. That is such a great observation. To say there is that is, that's a huge part that you're looking for. All of this is that extra bit that goes on. Likewise, we would have got Rethink funding, and they do promotional videos and they do social media, and that can be really help get the name of your work out there. Marvelous, great point. Thank you so much for that. Okay, now when you're big, you can start looking at Europe, or when you've got a bit of experience. So some of the Europe funds can be really challenging because they take an enormous amount of reporting. It's a very loud nose blow. I hope you're feeling all right. And so they can be, sometimes you can be warned off European funding, but there are ones that do work. So we'll have a staff member assigned to helping people understand and access European funding. So that is Access Europe. You can see that is the first one there on the list. They're very good about helping you assess whether your project is going to be useful. Or whether it's going to be useful or not.
Somebody living in Dire Straits.
What's that?
Do you know the Emily that mom put her foot on the door and we went to the Garda station? Yeah, she got moved there.
Oh, guys, whoever's talking there, we can hear you. So you might want to turn your mic off. I think there's a phone in the car, maybe. Great one, guys. Okay, so Legis can be good for educational activity, and especially if you want to bring people to Europe, all that kind of thing. Youth group, youth work, that kind of stuff can be great. And then you can see there another environmental type program, but do go to Access Europe, and that's the big advice if you want to get those. I can see there's a question in relation to Google grants, which just I've just seen there in chat. Would the Google grant help if courses were part subsidized rather than families paying full price? You'd have to talk to them. They can have some quite hard and fast rules. So I would go and ask that question of them. It's quite burdensome to get onto the Google grant program, but once you get there, it's amazing. You know, it's really worthwhile for advertising and things like that. So I would ask them those questions. Great. Sorry, I don't know exactly the one today. Okay. This is a chance for you guys to just share any experience. The ones that you have shared to date are amazing. Or also ask any questions about any of those grants. Over to you guys, just for a minute. Anything you'd like to ask? No. Okay. Let's keep going then. Okay, let's write a grant application that's going to win us some money. What I want to talk to you before we even start putting pen to paper is the notion of a full cost recovery approach. Has anyone heard this before? You're all very
no.
No, okay. I'm going to take it as a no for the whole group then. Okay. What this means is that often when people go for grants, and often it's like a project. So I'll talk about this as a project grant. And let's say you're going to run a new youth group, or we just heard that lovely example of running a pre-CE program for young people. Excellent. And you might say, okay, we need 2 tutors, it's going to cost this much. We need to hire the hall, it's going to cost this much. We want to bring them on a bus trip, it's going to cost this much. We want to give them a pizza at the end when they get their award, that's cost this much. Put it all together. That's how much the program costs. Very often, that's how we cost out programs, but that is not the right way to do it. There's a better way, which is called full cost recovery. That means we look at how much time the admin person puts into it, how much time you put into it as a manager or as a staff member. We look at the cost of insurance across our whole service, because it's very hard to get core funding, isn't it? Like almost impossible. Yeah. So when we go for any fund, we want a certain amount of it to come back to these core costs, because we can find very quickly that we can set up an unsustainable organization with bits of funds, because with each fund we have to do something, and it draws from the central, draws from the manager, the admin, the board's time. And by doing this, we're actually pulling money back into the core that we can then use to be a bit more sustainable, bit more resilient. And it's actually the real cost of doing business. So the best way to do this is work out an organizational approach to this. So how do you charge out for grants? Doesn't need to be complicated. It just means that you say, how much of all these things do we put in? What the best way to start it is to say, what are all our costs? So what are the costs of our admin, of our staff, of our insurance, of our building, all our core costs, ESB, phone, etc. And then you say how much will be spent on this project. And you could do it. Let's say that your program costs 100,000 to run. And you're applying for 10,000. An easy enough way that you could defend would be, well, 1/10 of our costs is going to be spent on this program. So 1/10 of insurance, 1/10 of admin. So that's one way to do it. Sometimes people just put an overheads section in. It can be anywhere between 5 and 20%. A safe medium would be 10 to 12%. If you're going over that, you want to really be able to substantiate it. Okay. So, and obviously sometimes funders don't like this. They're like, oh, we're not going to pay for your core costs. We're only doing project costs. Yeah. So sometimes you've got a little bit of a fight on your hands with this. But it's really good to start from the point of view of asking for it, because it's actually the reality, isn't it? Yeah. Like, who else is going to pay for you guys if each grant isn't paying for it? So do try and put it in. And, the simplest way as well is to say, for every grant, 10 or 15% is we're going to put towards core. So if you're applying for $5,000, 500 is going to be towards core costs. And it can be useful to do that at a board level so that everybody knows what you're going to be doing for that. And then to defend it with funders when you do. And of course, if we're all doing it, it becomes the standard, and that's better for us all into the future, isn't it? Any questions on that?
I have found in the past that we would always have put that in. We nearly call it, I suppose, a management fee, because it is the financial and oversight governance of the. But it's amazing how many funders will just say, no, take that out. That's the frustrating part of it. You know,
it is.
I agree with you. We do put it in.
Great.
And a lot of them bat it back to us.
Yes, they will too. And so, and I think having an argument with them is a good idea as well. Because sometimes we can feel a bit powerless with funders. We ought to do, because we're providing an important service. So, you know, welcome the dialogue. Be like, look, we would like to, but we have a policy that we don't, because this is how much it costs.
Yeah.
Like, we're pulling someone away from that. We're going to have to replace them. Now, you've got a harder case to make if you have core funding. So let's say TUSLA funds your manager and your admin. You know, you've got a slightly harder case, because they're like, well, they can do it as part of their role. So you want to actually be like, why can't we do this? You know, why can't, and you might say, our core funding is not enough to fund all of our costs. So every project has to contribute, because otherwise we are not sustainable. In the end, that's your argument. You're not sustainable if projects don't contribute to costs. And that's quite hard to argue with, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so, but if you were a project, and there's not many of these, the big ones maybe, you know, but they will often, the big ones will have a full cost recovery model for their funds. They will. And then they'll make a decision if it's not allowed, whether they go for it or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Nice one. Anyone else have any questions about that? Does it make sense?
Perfect.
Yeah, it does. To us, yeah, give us some money to run our service. Of course, it makes sense to us, doesn't it? Our challenge is making it make sense to them. Great one, guys.
Caroline, I just wanted to ask, you know, could you be refused funding on the grounds of putting in overhead costs when it states, say, in the application that they won't cover it?
Well, yeah, if they've said very clearly, we will not cover any staff cost. Yeah. Put it in as contribution towards rent and insurance.
Okay.
So yeah, you have to, there's lots of ways you can frame it.
Okay.
You want to frame it in a way that suits their framing. Because often, you know, we're trying to align the way we communicate to their words and the way they communicate. We're not ever telling a lie. You are going to put that towards your core costs.
Yeah.
So yeah, so frame it in a way that's suitable to them, acceptable to them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so we can never lie, obviously, because we would lose our license. I mean, it's ethically terrible, and also we'd lose our license or our credibility. So we can never lie, but we can frame things in a way that is true and that suits people. And that's a lot of what grant writing is about. It's about saying, what do you care about? What do I care about? Now, how do we communicate so that we're talking about the same thing? Okay, so now let's look at your USP. Can we hear a little bit about your pitch? Why the pitch that won the Coca-Cola Fund? Who was that again?
Katrina Boomerang.
Katrina, can you tell us why was your pitch so good? What made your pitch a winning pitch?
I kept it short, to the point, and I made it as compassionate and real about a person. I used examples. I think my pitch might have only been about 5 minutes, but I had 2 videos in it of past people who had gone through the program and the benefits to them. So they could really see a person and see how beneficial this was going to be to assisting and developing somebody to move forward.
I love it. I love it. We teach this, so we do a leadership course in NCI twice a year, and we teach the audience in that course is very much like yourselves. It's kind of community leaders, and we teach them how to do a pitch. You know how many minutes we give them to do a pitch where they include a story, an ask, and some data. we give them 2 minutes. So I love when you said short at 5 minutes. I mean, and yeah, lots of people could go on and on. I think 5 minutes is
I think that might have included the question and answer section as well. So.
No, I think that's brilliant, Katrina. 5 minutes as a pitch is really great. I mean, if you wouldn't want to go too much on than that, because you want to keep things short and sharp. I love that you said. I love that that's the first thing you said.
Yeah.
You know, we were short.
Yeah.
These days, I mean, it's social media days. No one has any attention span. So yeah, short is between 2 and 5 minutes. And I love that you said you've got to tell a story. And remember this in everything, including in writing things. How do you tell and like a good pitch will always have a story, a quote, a photo. We want to hear, we want to understand who the service user is. So what we teach when we're teaching people how to actually tell a story, and this isn't quite what we're talking about here. I'm about to talk about the USP, which is our unique selling point. But let's talk about pitching though for a minute. Is you've got to pull the heartstrings. You've got to show them a before and an after. And the best way to do that is to tell a tiny little story. When you're preparing a story, think of a service user and make them up like a composite of service users. It doesn't have to be an exact truth. It has to be a general truth. And you can make up your service user and then you have to show the solution for them. So that's a good thing to practice if you're ever doing the next one. And if you wanted us to help you work on a pitch or a proposal, we could do that as part of this program as well. That's what you could use your mentoring services. I think I'd be happy to do that. We'll have to check out that's allowed, but I think it would be. Okay, so let's work on your USP. Slightly different from your pitch, but your USP has to be part of your pitch. Before you go looking at any funds, take the project that you want to do and decide, why is this special? Why is what we're offering special? Because if you're just answering the questions that they are asking you and you haven't thought of your USP, it might end up a little bit bland. But if you've sat and you've said, why are we great? Why would you want to fund us? Why are we sexy? Why are we interesting? Why are we important? Why do we matter? If you've answered those questions, when you go to write your fund, it's much more likely that you're going to be able to do something that really speaks to what you are, that really sells you. So I want you guys all, I'm actually going to put you in a little group for a minute. We are going to pause recording and I'm going to put you in a little group, Zoom recording. Okay, so that's our USP. We want to know it first before we get into other things. Okay, so now 3 key steps. We know our USP. We're going to get our fund. We're going to read all the marking criteria. The marking criteria matters probably the most because that's what they will score you on. We need to read all their stuff and we need to make notes. So we need to make notes. What we're trying to do, what we're trying to make our notes on is, what do they think is important? Is it innovation? Is it reach? Is it a specific geographical area or an age group or a theme? Do they want proven interventions or do they want innovation? So what things do they particularly care about? What jargon do they use? Write down the words. Are they saying evidence-based all the time? Are they saying innovation all the time? That's the words you need to use back to them. So we're going to write down what they care about and what words they use. If we don't know, we're going to ring them up and ask if there's anything we don't understand. And you need to understand your strengths and weaknesses. That's essentially our USP, what we just did. Next, we're going to make our case. So we need to know what our weaknesses are. So it might be that, that we haven't done a big enough pilot. It might be we're in the wrong area or an age group that they're not quite interested in. So we're going to have to look at how we adapt to that, because we have to meet their core criteria. And so how do we do it when maybe who we are isn't quite who they want, but we still want the fund? Well, we might look at a partnership. Can we partner with someone else that addresses that bit of it? Can we change our angle slightly? Now, be aware of mission drift. I'm going to talk about that next. Okay. And then we want to show our strengths. So that's very much what we were just looking at, the USP there. You need a data. You need data. You need an evidence base. So you need some references from a model used in another country that shows that what you're doing makes sense. You need a graph, a quote, and a story. You got to have those things, because when you put them together, that's what gives you credibility, is that combination. That's how you explain your unique selling point, what makes you special. You want to be good value. So just work out how much it costs. So if you're running a course for 10 kids, if it costs $700 a kid, is that good value? Maybe not. But if it costs $150 a kid, okay, that seems like more value, better value. So just think about it from their angle. They're often going to do the maths, and they're going to look at a per unit cost. So you should too, and make sure it's something that you can stand over. Once you've written it all out, get it proofed, get it edited, get someone with experience to review and amend. So you want to build in that time, especially if you're just starting to do tenders. If you're on a board and staff are doing them, offer yourself out to be the person who reviews those. Okay, mission drift. This is when we move too far. So we've got a good idea, we see a fund, but we say, oh, they don't want the age group that we want. So they're only looking at under 18s, where we've been running our program for 18 to 21-year-olds. How much do you change before you break? Okay, so there can be good mission drift. Good mission drift is when it makes strategic sense on the pathway you want to go to. So for example, Harvard University was originally set up to prepare ministers of upright character. I don't think anyone would argue that them going on their current mission, as we'd understand it, which is to be a quality education provider, was a bad move for them, right? That's been good. We all know who Harvard is. So that was a mission drift that was positive. Why? Because the board were involved, because the stakeholders were involved, and they decided that there was a new emerging need that they needed to address. Now, often with our communities, or we look back on what our organizations were 5-10 years ago, they're going to have moved and adapted as our constituents or our stakeholders' needs changed. Great. So that's good mission drift. Bad mission drift is when we change what we're doing to get a fund. And we can be, when money is tight and resources are hard to get, we can be really tempted to do this. Just stretch a little too far. So what we end up doing is we end up pulling our precious resources, our management, our admin, our staff time, away from our core business. And that can have a really bad effect. So imagine you're a small community parenting organization and you start running an after school program, which is 3/4 funded. So you get some nice funding for it. Coca-Cola gives you 10 grand or 5 grand, and that's marvelous. But actually everybody ends up doing this. And you're a parenting program, you're not actually an after schools program. So it actually pulls people away, because while it was aligned to what you're doing, it's not exactly what you're doing. And we often see that that can be very, very deleterious to organizations, because people then become frustrated, because then when you have to report on your core mission, you can't as well. People are overworked, and it starts to feel messy and scrappy because you were chasing the funding. And it means that overall, this impact story of your organization starts to deteriorate. So do be very aware of that. You want to be a bit flexible to be able to speak to different funds. But if you're too flexible, it can end up actually breaking your organization. Okay. And you want to look at this. It also helps to say, does this add to our bottom line? I.e., does it help us be financially sustainable? But does it also add to the mission? What we exist to do, and you want it to do both. If it only does one of those two, there's a question as to really whether you should take it or whether you should hold tight. Okay, guys, if you want, there's some quick tips on actually writing funding applications, but here, really importantly, is a whole lot of guides that will help you do it. So you can go and read those when you're doing one, and it will walk you through those steps. That's because I want to talk to you a little bit.
Sorry, can you go back to the other slide, please?
Yeah. You'll get these sent out to you guys. You don't have to write them all down or anything like that. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So save your time. Just you can look at them when they get sent out. Okay, that's because I want to talk to you about engaging corporates. Okay, so supermarkets, insurance companies, local businesses. How do we do it? They can be great sources of small money. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get that USP and that pitch sorted. We need to be able to say, remember, a quote, a story, some data, and always the story. And we've heard that for Coca-Cola. It's a story that wins over our corporates. We need to get that down. We need to look at how it's going to speak to their goals. So pretty much a business will never give you money because, like, did Coca-Cola pay for that program because they like the young people? Not really, right? They paid for that program because they want to sell Coke. And they want us to look at Coke and be like, oh, these guys, these are the good guys. I want to buy a Coke. I don't feel bad about this company. I feel good about this company. So they're always coming at it from a marketing view. I mean, they might also be really nice people, and they probably are, but primarily the company's engaging it from a marketing perspective. So you want to be able to talk about how you're going to help them with their marketing perspective. How many eyeballs will you bring to their product? How will your narrative help their narrative? And obviously, that really helped, because your beautiful story in the Coca-Cola one, you're saying they gave us enormous media. Who else got the media? Coca-Cola. That's a beautiful corporate partnership. The two coming together. They get to leverage your story, one of change and hope. That's what you're selling to them. What they're buying from you is who you are. And that lends Coke a certain sheen. Okay? So that's what we're doing. We have to think about that, and we have to be able to package it up for them. We need to frame it as a mutually beneficial relationship, because it should be, otherwise it's not, it won't happen. Follow up and learn from rejection. So if you are talking to businesses, you need to say, oh, look, was there something that didn't sit with you? Was it not the right time? Was it something we said or didn't say? We'd be really interested in your feedback, so that you can get better and better at this. It takes a while. So we know one youth service who got $1 million funding, €1 million funding. Huge, right? Over 3 years they got this. Took them 2.5 years to build that relationship. And they got little bits of funding from this company, but they had their eye on the prize in terms of having a big national sponsorship of a program. So those pots are there, but it does take an awful lot of time relationship building. If you're local and you're just looking at your business and your bank and your local credit union, it's the same kind of thing though. You've got to build that relationship slowly. Try and do something small, try and then give them information, try and engage them in a working group. Try and think about ways that you can spend time together, and also things that you can do to tell them your story and to help them be like, oh my God, we did that. We were a part of that. We were a part of that project. Give them reports, have young people come in and visit, have them in an awards ceremony, get them to sit on a judging panel. All of these things can help create a relationship. And you need to think of it as you're in for the long haul if you want a corporate relationship. Definitely it can start though from a cold call, a good pitch or a good letter, where you tell, again, this heart and head story. You've got to pluck the heartstrings with that beautiful story, that beautiful show of compassion. And then you've also got to talk to the head by talking in practical terms what their money is going to get you. Be concrete. So if you're asking for something, ask for, we want 2,000 for this project. This is how many people it will involve. We're going to put it in the newsletter, and we're going to put it on the PPN newsletter, and it's going to reach 3,000 people. So you want to tell them how many people, what it costs, and what the reach is. They need to know all that. And you can do that in 10 seconds. But you've got to be very clear. That's what businesses like. They're used to dealing in clarity. Look for companies that share your values. And you find them out there. And a lot of companies now will have a corporate social responsibility goal. Often it will be quite local. If they're a local business, they'll want to have a local aspect. So that's where you guys, it's much less competitive than some of these big national funds. So this is really worth a route going down. And if you invest in it, it can pay off in the longer term. Okay, can I just ask, because whether we focus on this or something else, is anyone here writing tenders? Raise your hand if so. By tenders, I mean you're going for a contract. It's a different way of getting money. Okay, what we might do then is we might spend a little bit longer on the next bit rather than, hold on, let me see. Okay, I'll talk about this a little bit because it does apply. Some of this for like a tender and a big fund, like if you're going for, a 50 grand, 100 grand, 75 grand, anything like that, that's going to give you staff. Some of these things will apply. It's very similar to a tender that we might go for all of the time. So I might write 2 or 3 tenders a week sometimes is how much I would do. And we have to win 2 or 3 tenders a week or a bit more in order for our business machine to work. So we're doing this all of the time. What works? You need to evidence your evidence base. Okay, so this is one of those jargon words that you'll hear all the time. So it might be useful to talk about your service model. Give them a diagram. So often when you're reading things, a lot of people will be visual learners. And if you're reading a big, if you're reading, especially think about it from their point of view, they're reading like 10 or 15 or maybe 100 funding applications. They can all start to merge into one. it can really help if you take, rather than just writing paragraphs all the time, if you use an image. Not all funds, not all applications will let you do that, but if you can do, try and show it some of the stuff pictorially, as well as maybe explain it very briefly. Often you can do something which is called like critical success factors. Like, what are the aspects of our program that make this work? Again, bullet points. You're saying like, we absolutely must have at least 8 sessions. We only use tutors with experience in A, B, and C. These kind of things. Like, if you like, it's the how of what you do. So you're trying to convince people of why you're good. There will be elements of your quality that you can define. Don't assume them, tell people what it is. So if Brian's growing these special native trees, then what makes Brian's seedlings better than other people's seedlings? Like, are they grown outside so they've got better root structure because they've been in the elements for longer? Brian, I have no idea if that makes a better seedling, but let's pretend it does. If it's not that, what is it? What makes Brian's seedling the best seedling? You want to try and get a bit of research for anything that you're doing. So, and does it take that long? It doesn't take that long, guys. Go onto Google Scholar. Put in the keywords that you're using. Find research and then have it as footnotes. It makes you seem more serious. It makes you seem like you know what you're doing. So if you use a model, if you are using a counseling approach, if you're using a certain kind of seedling or tree planting that you are advising for rewilding, let's say. Brian, I have no idea what you do, so I'm just making up projects for you. But let's say Brian is rewilding. He wants to say, we've chosen these 4 types because of research. We need to know that, we need to believe Brian. And people believe you if you've done research. So there we are, guys. You've got to have some footnotes. If you've never done research before and that really intimidates you, don't let it, because you can do it. Like, if you can read, you can do this stuff. It's not, it seems often more intimidating than it is. Basically, Google Scholar is a Google search. You put in what you're looking for, you read some stuff, and then you use that as a link. You just put in the link to this research at the end of the point that it is saying. And you've never done it before, you could do this. You can do it. If you've never done it before, though, you might want to sit down with someone who has and get them to show you, so you feel a little bit more confident. Okay, outline what your quality indicators are. So all calls responded to an hour. So if you're a helpline, that would be really, really important. Like, again, how do you define your service? What will you commit to? What is quality? How do you measure it? Tell them. Use data. So there's lots of different data that we can use. You want to get data on process. So you want to say, so process is like what you do. So you might want to say 80% of our young people attend every single course. That's meaningful, isn't it? Like, if you heard that, you'd be like, well, that sounds like a good program. So that's process or management data where you're saying what we do. You might want to see, you want all of our seedlings are at least 20 centimeters high at the point of sale, and I don't know, something else about a quality of a seedling, for instance. So you're trying to define what quality is based on your service. Satisfaction. So 95% of people said that this is good. Now, be wary, because there's a, what's it called? You want to get really high. People who say something is a 5. So if there's a 10-point marking scheme, and basically only 9s and 10s count. Okay, so if you know that and you see someone who's ever giving not 9s and 10s, they're neutral. Okay, on a 10-point marking scheme, a neutral mark is a 7 or 8. So just be aware of that fact. But satisfaction is how much people like it. How many people would refer a friend? How many people would come back again? That kind of data can be very useful. Are you satisfied? 97% of people said that this was the best course they'd done. 80% of parents of people using the yoga thing stated that this had improved their child's communication skills or focus. Data helps us. That brings us on, though, actually, the 2 bits of data I just used then are actually outcome data. So outcome data is, it's not how I enjoy, how I enjoyed it, my experience is satisfaction. Outcome is what changed for for me? As a result of doing this, what changed in my life? And generally think of behavior change. So in our child yoga, what do you call it? Air yoga? What was it called? Does anyone remember?
Anti-gravity.
Anti-gravity. So cool. For a start, it sounds cool. So, I mean, that's going to get you half the way there to getting some money. Who doesn't want to fund anti-gravity yoga? So what are the outcomes? We want to say things like the following. 80% of parents of children in the anti-gravity yoga pilot, don't call it a program, call it a pilot, said that it increased their children's focus. Their children appeared happier. Their children appeared calmer. 87% said the children appeared calmer. 49% said, so that's the data that you need. You can get that. The first thing to do to get that outcome data is you need to talk to your people and say, what changed for you? Okay, so just ask them, what changed? You get enough of the people telling you that, and then you give everybody else a survey. You give everybody a survey. It says, Mark, how much change you had? There's your data. Okay, and that outcome data, now I'm saying this quite quickly, and we do have a whole training program on establishing an outcome framework. Okay, so we do a whole thing on that. This is just an introduction, but now you know you need to go and have an outcome framework if you don't have one already, because the outcome framework is the driver of good funding applications. And big funds like like Rethink, Social Entrepreneurs Ireland, Community Foundation, they hire people like us to assess outcome frameworks and to help people make outcome frameworks. Okay, so they're really interested in, especially philanthropy, more so than the government. Philanthropy wants to see you have outcome data. So start on that journey, because it's a long old journey. It's not easy to do, and it does take time and energy. So there's not a simple fix, but also you can do it simply, you know? So it's not, you have to think about it a bit and you have to kind of do it, but you can also do it in a way where you start getting a little bit of data that you can use, and then you can build from there. Okay, beware of your own jargon. Okay, so definitely look for all their jargon and then give it back to them. If you don't know what a word is, call someone who does. Call someone from the local partnership, or someone like us, or a trainer or a consultant or another service, and say, they keep using this thing. What are they talking about? But be careful if you're reading the jargon back to them, especially if they're not in our sector. Okay, so who's in our sector? Anyone who's working with not-for-profits the whole time. But let's say they're a business or a corporate, be really careful of jargon, because we talk in a way that other people don't talk, and every industry does it. It's because we like to have a sense of belonging. We like to be special. So we'll use words. Like you'll often hear people say, oh, we work with people where they're at. Yeah, have you guys used that term or heard people saying it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, often we say it. But if you say that to someone in a business sector, they'll be like, what are you talking about? And that doesn't mean anything to them. It's just utter nonsense. Like, what do you mean where they're at? Like, physically, what? Are you doing GPS? Like, what do you mean? So for us, it's just natural. Sometimes we don't even see our own jargon. So, and often jargon is shorthand and it's not specific. We want to say very specifically what we're doing and why. So really do watch that, and you'll be surprised at how much jargon we speak to each other. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to go back onto that that way. I'm going to go back onto that tender. No, I'm not. Okay, that's all I wanted to do for the tender bit. The Holy Grail, guys, getting state cash a roller. Don't we want this? Who doesn't? Is there anybody here who doesn't want more money from the government? I know. It's very hard to get that. Very hard to get. So let's look at how you might do it. But I would say my first thing is, just because you're good, it's not enough. Okay, there isn't enough funding in this holy world to fund every great idea out there. And there's so many things: social work, health services, youth services, child safety protection that are underfunded. So when we start off with this, I think we have to realize that we're getting into quite a frustrating zone, because we know that people need our services, and we know that people are sometimes in danger or unsupported, or going to have much worse outcomes, or the environment's not going to be cared for, or people aren't going to get what they need. We know that because of what we do, and we can get really, really frustrated. So what I want to say at the very beginning is, be aware of that frustration. as you start working with the state, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. Philanthropists, funding applications, they're sprints. You write the application, you get the money, and you do something good. Amazing. And you have to keep doing that. But there's a big marathon that we're often playing for, which is that eventually we get some state funding. So this is a different kind of thing. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to go and see other services like yours. Where are they getting money from? Who gives them cash? And don't just look at one, look at like 10, 15. Who are they? And but beware, just because a funder gives them money doesn't mean they're going to give you any. Why? Because there's more need than there is money. And it's very, very hard for state agencies to take money away from a service, even if you're doing something better than someone else. And this is often the case. They're not going to take money away from another service and give it to you, even though you might have proof that you're better. Why? Does anyone want to give me an answer on why they wouldn't do that? Anyone want to try for an answer on that one?
You don't have a box to tick for that.
Yeah, well, that's a little bit of it. Yeah, and well, I'd say there's two big reasons. One is political fallout. Like the political fallout of defunding some organization is going to be far worse for them than the political gain of funding something new. Yeah, if you take stuff away from people, from our community and organization, then that is going to be a lot worse for them. So that's one big reason why they don't take away funders from services that are doing bad and give them to ones that are good or could do better. The other thing is it's very hard to tell. There's almost never this thing called proof that shows that you're better. Like, you might think you're better, you might think they're shit, but is there proof to say so? Most often not. But even when there is, that probably isn't enough, okay? Because it's a political world that we live in. So that is a bit of a challenge, okay? So people who already have it are unlikely to lose it unless they're like wicked terrible, or they do something uber illegal, or it's no longer viable in quite a big substantial way, okay? So that makes getting state funding quite hard. But still, doesn't mean it's impossible. So we need to understand and make a case on the problem that we are resolving for them. And being able to understand what is the problem that you have and how can we fix it. And that moves us back to our USP, to our pitch, to our proof, to our outcome data, okay? All that stuff is how we show that we're fixing it. Remember if they have an open call. So your best bet to get state funding is to go into an open call. When they say, we're going to fund 5 new projects doing this thing, we want to see what's out there. That is always your best bet, because at least you're in an open competition and there is some funding. Okay. But so this is almost always, though, a long-term strategic issue, is that we are trying to build relationships. I think this is really easy. Ask for money, get advice. Ask for advice, get money. So it can be a much better strategy to really build those relationships over time. Now, you might have a really strong case, but it needs to meet their priority when they have a budget to meet it. And that's pretty seldom. Okay? So, I mean, there's 1,000 needs. Like, we could put more social workers into half of the cities and towns in Ireland and we'd still not have enough. Okay? So there's always needs, but there's often a priority in those needs. So something that's really giving them grief. So if you can, in Dublin Council, if you can right now solve fly tipping, you know what I mean by fly tipping? People going and dumping all their rubbish in alleys. If you can solve that, you'll get money. I promise you. I can put you in touch with someone who will give you cash. Because this is a priority issue for this council. So they won't fund other things, even though they're really worthwhile, because they're not solving the issue that is causing them untold expense and grief. Can someone just turn off their mic?
Sorry, my tablet is down. My tablet is down. I was trying to transfer to my phone.
Okay, Bridget, I just muted you then to solve the problem. Take your time. So often people are frustrated. Oh, and I'm getting an echo. Is someone else in Bridget's room?
No, it's just me. I was,
Okay, have you got your other one off now, Bridget? Yes.
yeah.
Yay, sorted. Okay, great. So we could be doing something that's important, okay, and that we have proof for and that we're good, but that's not enough. The new money or money can only be found for the priority often. So how do you understand what their priorities are? Go and talk to them. Go and talk to them and see what they are, and just be aware that, you know, there's going to be different perspectives. I mean, think how many problems the council has. They have like 10,000 problems, right? And 10,000 needs. But there's going to be one that's exercising them for some reason. Right now it's fly tipping. So that's the priority. And it's, I think sometimes I know, because I'm also in the situation of trying to get funding for our projects. Sometimes it can be a bit frustrating because you're like, why do you care about that when these young people don't have this vital support? Like, don't you care about people with disabilities? Now, of course they do, but it's just not the screaming priority for them at the moment. So, but finding their priorities and solving their priorities is great. So right, for TUSLA, if you can keep kids out of care, you know, out of needing state care, that's a priority for them right now. So if you have a proven way of doing that, they are more likely going to open the door to you when all of these other needs, which they would agree are vitally important. It's not an issue of things being important or not important, but there's a priority. There's something that's really, really problematic for them. And it might be that they can't get foster carers. And so if you can solve that problem in a region, either getting them foster carers, or if you can stop kids going into care, then they might be willing to pay you substantial amounts to do that work because it's a priority right now. So understanding what your state cares about. So in the environment, if you can get farmers to do something that they want farmers to do, or if you can, you know, understanding where they're at and what issues they can't solve, that's your biggest bet for getting, you know, the kind of big money that we're talking about. But the other way, lots of us just chip away for this at years for this. And so building political and agency support. So what we need is well-positioned advocates for our work. And what works really well here is giving them jobs, like giving them on a steering group or a working group. Like, so if you've got a pilot of a new program, you want some people from the people you're going to be talking about, funders. You want people on those working groups so that they're involved, they're vested, they see it as theirs. And then it's like, it's not, because it's much more effective. If it's not someone from outside asking the funders for money, it's someone inside, either doing the introduction or doing the connection. So put them on a steering group, make them your judging panel, give them a role of advisor, ask their advice, make them a judge on something, ask them to an open day, ask them to speak at your event, ask for a meeting where you ask them for a critique on your strategy, whatever it takes to build a relationship, a professional relationship based on their expertise and advice. How can you get them to care about you? Well, by listening to what they say. So that can work really, really well. And that has to be a long-term strategy though. All right, guys. We are at time. So I'm going to end the recording, and thank you so much for coming and being part of this. I'm going to allow we're going to stop the recording.